Is the job you have isn't working out for you, you're considering truck driving or bus driving as an alternative career, but you have to get retrained. You're definitely in the right place, and we're going to help you out to get ready with the right information to start a career as a truck or bus driver. Stick around, we'll be right back with that information. Hi there, smart drivers. Welcome back. Rick with Smart Drive Test talking to you today about starting a career as a truck or bus driver. The job you got isn't working out for you, and you're considering going to truck driving school to get a job and have more employment. Now, the first thing I'm going to say about becoming a truck or bus driver, you're always going to be employed. Okay? The only unemployed truck or bus driver is the truck or bus driver that wants to be unemployed. Now, saying that, once you get out of truck driving school and you start working as a truck or bus driver, it's going to be pretty tough for you to get a job. The reason it's tough for you to get a job is because you don't have any experience. And these vehicles are expensive. Just a day cab truck is a brand new one is $100,000 now, which is, a crazy amount of money. And then you put a trailer on behind it and you put some freight on it, you're looking at $300,000, $400,000. And if you're damaging equipment when you start, you're slow to getting to carriers and they have to handhold you and babysit you, those types of things. This is the reason why. The other motivating factor that makes it difficult for you to get a job as a truck or bus driver when you start is insurance. It's difficult for fleets to get insurance to cover new drivers, and this is the other reason why it's tough for you as a truck or bus driver to get a job when you first get out of truck driving school and get your license. So those are some of the things that you're up against, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible. Yes, it's tough. Yes, it's challenging, but you can do it, and there are ways to give yourself an edge so that you are more employable when you come to companies. And the other thing that is critical after you get out of truck and bus driving school, even before you start truck or bus driving school, if you are seriously considering going to truck driving school to become a driver, you need to start networking even before you start truck driving school. You need to start looking for a job. You need to start talking to people, and you need to say, listen, I'm going to truck driving school, I'm going to get my license, and I want to have a career as a truck or bus driver. If you can do that, it's going to be easier. The transition is going to be easier for you to move on and become a truck or bus driver, okay, once you do that. And Bill Walker, one of my poster students, is he came to truck driving school, got his license, finished on Thursday, and the next Tuesday was working in the industry because he had effectively networked. He had talked to everybody about getting a job in the oil fields before he even started working as a truck or bus driver, and he had a plan. He worked his plan. It didn't exactly work out in the end. He retired a little bit earlier, but he did do what he needed to do. So, he was successful in his plan, and now he's retired and living with his wife half-time here and half-time in Mexico. So, if you're just tuning in, let us know where you're tuning in from. Let us know what class of license you're going for. If you are considering getting a job as a truck or bus driver, and any questions we can answer. If you're watching on the replay, leave us a comment down in the comment section there, and we'll definitely help you out to get you started on a new career. So, Kara is here. Hello, my friend. Ryan is here. I checked the website of truck driving schools here in Regina. For mandatory training is $11,000. It's more expensive than a course at trade school. Yes. And Ryan, there are reasons for that in Canada that we're now going to the mandatory entry-level training. And unfortunately, I see this coming for the United States as well. There's a lot of publicity that was around the Humboldt bus crash here in Canada, and that has motivated governments to implement mandatory entry-level training. I don't know whether it's better or not, but it is definitely more challenging for people to go to truck driving school. I know I was talking to an owner of a truck driving school in Ontario a couple of weeks ago, and the cost of the course, which I believe is 110 hours there, is now $6,500. But there is funding available. There is funding available to go to truck or bus driving school. Okay, Eddie, I got my CDL license for $1,000 in Miami, Florida, and you've been trucking for 3 years. Yes, and that is still a possibility in some places that the tuition fee can be a little bit less, and you can get your license. There are ways to do that without having to go to truck driving school. Unfortunately, like as I said, this mandatory entry-level training has made it difficult for people wanting to go to truck and bus driving school. Now, the other thing that I'm going to say to you is, yes, it's going to cost you $10,000 to $15,000 to go to truck driving school, but the return on investment is really good. It's not like going to trade school. You're going to go to trade school to become a plumber, to become an electrician. People are saying now that, tradespeople are working all the time, plumbers and electricians and those types of things. I'm not necessarily on board with that, and maybe some of the smart drivers who are watching here now or watching on the replay can give some feedback on that as well. I think a lot of the tradies, yes, there's a lot of call for them in the summertime, but I think a lot of them are not working in the wintertime. I have a good friend here, actually my business partner, who is a general contractor. He doesn't work most of the winter. He doesn't work for 2 or 3 months. So I think a lot of the tradespeople are not working in the wintertime. So they don't have full-time employment. So let me know what you think. Whereas truck drivers, you're working all the time. If you want to work, you're going to work because there's work out there, especially after you get your 6 months, 1 year experience. Sign Cutter, good afternoon. I'm on day 2 of my CDL school at a community college in North Dakota. Would be doing the school bus and CDL. Approximately $2,500 for the cost. So that's a good return on investment. And the places that don't have the mandatory entry-level training as of yet, you can still get a tuition costs for truck driving school are still in the kind of $2,000, $3,000 for the tuition. But you have to remember, you also have to live during that time if you're not working part-time or don't have some other form of subsidy. So that's the other consideration. So in the video that I put up again this morning, because I edited it, you need to ask when you can get a road test date, because the longer it takes to get a road test date, the more it's going to cost you to live while you're going to truck driving school. So know that when you go into the truck driving school, and ask them the questions you need to ask them in terms of doing your research. When can you get a road test date? Because that's going to increase the cost of you getting a license. All right. So Sign Cutter saying that the federal motor carriers there in the United States has delayed mandatory entry-level training. Hello, Shamil. How are you, my friend? Arlington, Texas, On Track Driving School. They just got going there, and their course is $3,500, $3,600. Excellent. And they're making it mandatory here in Texas also, and you have to have a Texas license in order to attend. Yes, and that's an excellent point that Shamil just made. Before you attend truck driving school, you have to go and get a learner's. It's the same as a passenger vehicle. You have to go and write your CDL learner's license in order to go to truck driving school, because you have to be in the vehicle, have to have a learner's license, and then be with a driving instructor. So you have to study the CDL manual for your state or your province, and then go to the DOT or the testing authority, and you have to write a theory test. And the theory test is going to be based on all of the chapters that are in the CDL manual, and that can be quite extensive. We do have a couple of the chapters up here. Lots of videos on the Smart Drive Test channel about air brakes. Lots of information here about the Chapter 2 of the Texas CDL manual and the New York CDL manual. And Shamil is also, she just texted me on Instagram there yesterday. She's also doing courses on becoming an owner-operator and also dispatch courses. So Shamil is doing a really awesome job down there in Texas, training people in the trucking industry. Okay, and good to know that they are, in fact, bringing in the mandatory entry-level training. It's going to be kind of, it's always about a decade before whether we see that these new programs that are coming in are actually going to be as good as we would like them to be or not. Whether they're beneficial to the industry, because it takes a long time for this to kind of filter out into the industry, and see whether this is going to, stem the flow of drivers that are actually coming out of truck driving schools. And the other question that I have that I need to do a bit more research in these places that they do have mandatory entry-level training for truck drivers. If I decided that I didn't want to go to truck driving school and didn't want to do the mandatory entry-level training, can I challenge that somehow? If I already have experience, for example, I had a smart driver contact me a day or two ago about that he had his CDL in Jamaica for 2 years and was here, moved to Canada, immigrated to Canada, and was getting his license back. Can he challenge that? Can he just go to a truck driving school, take enough courses to get his license back, and then carry on with his or her life? I mean, that's the question that you need to ask in terms of this mandatory entry-level training. So those are a lot of questions you have to ask about going to truck driving school and getting your license and starting a career as a truck or bus driver. So as Shamil is saying, in Texas, in February, you have to go to truck driving school. You can't just go out and hire a truck or go out with your buddy and get in a truck and get your CDL license. You actually have to go to a truck driving school. Okay, so Martin, I've been trucking for 21 years, and honestly, it's not just getting your CDL. No, and Martin, that is an excellent point, and one of the things that I like to say to people who are considering a career as a truck or bus driver is that the real learning begins after you get your license. Believe me, just on one aspect of driving the truck, the sheer amount of paperwork that you have to do. I mean, now much more of it is going to be digital and streamed online because we have those communication things, those communication technology now, but still, trip sheets, logbooks, timesheets. What else am I thinking of? Fuel sheets. There's just a rack of paperwork that you have to do as a truck driver, and they don't teach you most of this stuff in truck driving school. Not to mention navigation and route planning. Yes, we now have GPS units in the trucks. We have them on our phones and those types of things. But you still have to be able to drive that truck up and down through a city because most of these loads that you're going to be delivering are going into major cities. And that can be a real shock for a lot of drivers, because especially when you just come out of truck driving school, I mean, you barely have a grasp, depending on how long your course was and how much seat time you got in terms of driving the truck in and around the cities. You have to drive that truck, and a lot of new drivers, brand new out of truck driving school, can barely drive the truck. They have just enough skills to be able to shift it and move it up and down the road, but then you got to move it up and down the road in a city, get around corners, and locate your destination, get into your destination, and go and find the shipper and figure out which door you got to back into and get that vehicle backed into a door safely. I mean, and doing that all on your own, when most truck driving schools don't teach you that. No truck driving school that I ever worked at taught students how to back into a loading dock. They just don't do that. They back into the parking space at the truck driving school, and they back up for the purposes of what's required on the road test. One truck driving, the one in Ontario that I worked at, they simply had to do a right-hand back around a corner, and that was it. And Shamil, I don't know what you're doing down there in Texas in terms of backing up and loading docks and those types of things, but for new truck drivers, that's a real shock to the system when you got to hit a dock, and you got to hit it square on. It's got to be in there right. Some of the trailers that I was delivering to Costco when I was on Vancouver Island there, it had to be square and it had to be centered in the dock, or the plate that comes up and sits on the back of the trailer for the forklift to go in, that plate wouldn't go in, and you had to come back and move the trailer and make it right. So, for new truck drivers, that can be a bit of a shock. All right, sign cutter, just got my license to learn. So you got your learner's license. That's awesome. Martin, I'm going to keep it clean but realistic. Without experience, most places won't take you unless you have a trainer. And yes, Martin, you're absolutely right that it can be challenging for new drivers to get a license. And as I say to students, to smart drivers, you have to beg, borrow, and steal a truck. And there are places that will hire you. You can, owner-operators you might get a job with them. You might get a job with a local excavating company running dump truck for a couple of months. you know, get on a farm, drive a farm truck, you know, whatever you can do to get experience. And I like the story about one of the students who came out of truck driving school, couldn't get a job, wanted to work for this one company, and he went down there and he basically said to them, he said, listen, I will work for free. And he came down, he sat in the office for 3 days. And finally they said to him, they said, okay, we got a load here that needs to go out. We don't have a driver. Do you think you can handle this? And the guy said, yeah. He says, I can do this. And he took it out, delivered the load, came back, and he got a job. But you have to be determined. You can't just respond to advertisements in the paper or those that are on Kijiji or whatever, you know, job posting website that you're looking at. You have to get out there. You have to bang on doors. You have to talk to people. You have to show them that you are determined, that you're motivated to get a job. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to get a job as a truck or bus driver. It's going to be really, really tough to break in and get that 6 months, 1 year experience that you need to get the job that you really want. Camille, so you do teach them to back up to a dock. That's really excellent. I commend you on that for sure, because then the student's not out in the industry trying to figure out how to do that. Sign cutter, I fly helicopter for an air ambulance company. I'm beginning to think there's more paperwork in trucking than in flying. And yes, there is, especially if you're running LTL. LTL stands for less than load, which means you have multiple drops on a trailer. And if you have multiple drops on a trailer, you got paperwork for every one of those, and then you got to make sure that the paperwork that you have in your hand is matching up with the paperwork that's on the pallet, that's on the boxes on the back. And when you're delivering, you're going to destinations and those types of things. I've had some crazy things with LTL freight. You know, ended up down in Lower Manhattan one day, and I went into the shipper, and I'm like, oh, I got some freight for you here, blah, blah, blah. Hand him the paperwork, and he's like, oh, it's not here. And I said, what do you mean it's not here? And it turned out that the company address was in Lower Manhattan, but the delivery address was actually in Brooklyn. So, you know, it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, rush hour. Now I got to drive to Brooklyn to actually get to the place that I need to be. And of course, you're on a schedule running LTL freight. I needed to be in Connecticut the next morning and didn't make it, you know, because now I'm late because I'm in the wrong place. And those types of things happen when you're doing LTL freight. Another LTL freight, I'm running up north in British Columbia here with a load of freight on. I got 5 or 6 drops. I'm thinking, I'm looking at the paperwork, and, you know, I've got enough experience to say to myself, wait a minute, something's not right here. Get on the phone to dispatch. And unfortunately, this happens sometimes with dispatch. They start having a go at you. And you're like, okay, just let me talk to the person who put the paperwork together. And the person with the paperwork, who did put the paperwork together, he says to me, he says, now just go through the paperwork. He says, you see the one with the number 1 on? I said, yeah, I see that one. He says, see the one with number 2? I said, yeah, I see that. And it turns out there's 6 drops. There's one drop in, you know, Vanderhoof, and then there's 5 more drops in Prince George. And I'm like, oh, well, it's a good thing that I called. And, you know, that's what happens. If you're a new driver and you are not certain of where you're going or what the paperwork is saying to you or how many drops you have on your trailer, get on the phone, call dispatch. And if they give you a hard time, just say, listen, I just need to figure this out. I need to be at the right place. Because the shipper's going to laugh if you show up and it's not all their stuff, okay? And you got to get it to where it needs to go. So that's what happens. Sign cutter, thanks for the class. Thanks for the info. You're most welcome. Corey's here, Bricks for Wheels. Corey is the moderator. Corey does an excellent job of helping me out here and keeping the live streams spam free, because, you know, when you get a little bit bigger, people start to spam you. Bombi, any suggestions on best truck driving schools in the greater Toronto area? Yeah, Bobby, best thing to do in terms of truck driving schools there in Toronto is to send me an email, rick@smartdrivetest.com, and I'll help you out, okay? Excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to the slideshow presentation. I'll just quickly go through that for you and go over that. So you want to work as a bus or truck driver. You want to get some experience. You want to get on and get some employment. So this is what this is going to help you do here. All right. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, there's always work as a truck or bus driver. And as is mentioned, as Martin said, it's difficult to break in, but you can break in, right? There are larger companies that have mentor programs that will send you out with a truck or another truck driver, and they'll show you through the ropes and those types of things. And I really encourage you to look for one of those because they're very helpful. There's always work. Myself, I never wasn't working, and even when I went to university, university cost me a great deal of money. I was always working part time as a truck driver, and I went into the industry, went back. When I went to Australia, I went back driving truck for 5 or 6 months, running long haul, and then when I went to Australia, I worked as a bus driver for Greyhound. And as some of you may or may not know, Australians are fond of saying that they founded Greyhound. I'm not really sure about that. And this is a picture of me in 2002 when I actually had hair and was driving buses for Greyhound. They call them coach captains. You're actually a coach captain. So, what do drivers do? And this was always one of my favorite questions when I was teaching truck driving and I had students in the truck. I would always say to the student, I'd say, what do truck drivers do? And it was always somewhat interesting, the responses that I get. Oh, they say, oh, I drive safely and I drive the truck up and down the road dutifully and blah blah blah. I just get a multitude of answers about what truck drivers do, and I would just say to students, truck drivers move freight and services between point A and point B as fast as humanly possible. And that's it. That's the bottom line. That's what you do as a truck or bus driver. And of course, when you're a bus driver, you keep a schedule and move passengers between point A and point B. Now, of course, there's safety and other things that are going on and those types of things, but you simply drive the truck between point A and point B. And, Shamil, you should ask some of your students that question, what truck and bus drivers do, and see what range of what answers you get, responses you get in terms of what they think they do, because there's kind of a weird perception about what truck and bus drivers do. And the other thing is if you're going into truck and bus driving school and you think that you're going to go out and see the world, you're really not. You're going to travel to different places, but for the most part, especially CDL drivers in the States, you're going to be looking at a lot of freeway, and that's basically it. You're not. It's not holidays. You are paid for a reason. You are paid to work, and you're paid to move freight and services between point A and point B as quickly as possible. Epic, my friend, I just looked at some CDL schools, and it seems they seem to be in the $2,000 range, but some have $1,500 packages. Will that be enough to earn either a Class A or B commercial licenses? Epic, you're in the States, right, on the East Coast. Yes, and some of those, yes, they're going to work out for you in terms of that, but you definitely want to see what the curriculum is that the school is offering, so you can get the most number of endorsements, because you want to get a tanker endorsement, passenger vehicle endorsement, you want to get your air brakes, those types of things, because the more endorsements that you have, the more employable you're going to be when you go to work for a job. So training for CDL license, driving schools, air brakes, on-the-job training, and working with a mentor. And as Martin said, especially for a lot of Americans, when you're in the United States, you're going to have trouble getting a job. You're going to want to go to work for a larger company that has a mentor program, which essentially they put you in the truck with another driver for 6 to 8 weeks, and send you up and down the road, and one driver is going to show you the ropes, where their shipping lanes are, what kind of paperwork they expect to be done, trip sheets, fuel sheets, those types of things, and procedures, how to get the truck, how to navigate, how to route plan, how to fill out ELDs, your electronic log device for hours of service compliance, and those types of things. So there's a lot that you have to know after you get your license. So driving schools, and this is the other thing that I'm going to say to you when you go to truck driving school. Yes, there are a lot of trucks now that are automatics, and a lot of the larger fleets in the United States and in Canada have gone to automatic transmissions, but the industry is still primarily non-synchro mesh, 9, 10, 13, 15, 18 speed transmissions. 15 speeds are on their way out. It's unlikely you're going to find a 15 speed now. Most of the stuff in the industry is going to be 9, 10, 13, and 18. And even 13s are on their way out in favor of 18 speeds, but an 18 speed is essentially a glorified 13 speed. And for more information on that, Corey will put the video up for you on how to shift a non-synchronous transmission. My point is, get the non-synchronous transmission on your license. Do not go to truck driving school and get an automatic endorsement and get that restriction on your license, because wherever you go, if you take your license on an automatic transmission, you're going to have that restriction on your license. You're only going to be able to drive automatic transmission vehicles. And in order to break into the industry, you're going to have to be able to drive non-synchronous transmissions. If you want to get a job at the local excavating company, if you get a job on the farm, if you get a job, working for a broker, you're probably going to have to drive a non-synchronous transmission. So it's going to be tough for you to break into the industry if you have an automatic transmission. All right? Shamil thinks that they're going on vacation. No, you're not going on vacation when you're driving a truck or a bus. You definitely are not. There's a reason you get paid. You get paid to work and move that freight between point A and point B as quickly as possible. All right, so that's the first point about truck driving school. Make sure you're able to learn how to double clutch and drive a non-synchronous transmission. The second point is, okay, say for example, you just want to drive a dump truck. All right, fine. You need a Class 3 license or a Class D license, which is a tandem axle on the back. It's a dump truck. Now, the challenge that you face, most excavating companies don't just have dump trucks. They have dump trucks with trailers on them. They're called pups. As soon as you stick a pup on the back of a dump truck, it's now a tractor trailer unit. You need a tractor trailer license to do that. And because it's difficult to break into the industry, when you have these excavating companies, they have the luxury of hiring just Class 1 drivers, just tractor trailer driver license, because in terms of logistics and scheduling drivers to work, it's difficult for them, because what happens is say for example, Tom is 6 and Tom drives one of the dump trucks and pups, and he has a Class 1 license. He has a tractor trailer license. Well, you only have a Class 3 license, so you can't drive that unit on the day that you get called in as a relief driver. Whereas if you have a tractor trailer license, you're going to go in and work as a relief driver, and you're going to get the experience that you need, the 6 months to 1 year experience you need to work as a truck or bus driver. And this is how you're going to do it. You're going to work as a relief driver. The other way that you can get into the industry is working for personnel agencies. Agencies that hire drivers and then outsource them to the industry. So the industry calls the personnel agency and said, listen, I need 2 drivers to go to Chicago, and they send the drivers out. That's another way that you can get into the industry and get the experience that you need. So the other point about that is get your Class 1 license. 80% of the information you learn for a Class 3 license or a Class D license for a straight truck is applicable to Class 1. The only thing that's different, the little bit more information that you need, is how to get a trailer up and down the road and get around corners. So there isn't a lot more information that you need to move from a dump truck up to a tractor trailer unit. It's just a little bit more information, and in the end, you're way, way more employable. You have more usable skills. So I strongly encourage you to get a Class 1 license to move into the industry. Okay? Don't just get a Class 3 unit, because it's really going to be tough for you to get a job driving a 5-ton, as it used to be called. They're probably a little bit more weight than that, but it's a 5-ton vehicle. All right, bus drivers. If you don't want to work as a bus driver, but you went to truck driving school, got your truck driving license, and got your passenger vehicle endorsement, you could consider a job as a bus driver. If you want to just work part-time in the morning and the afternoon, you can drive a school bus. You can go to work for Greyhound. There's tons and tons of 15-passenger buses, smaller buses, those types of things. Churches and charities. You can work tour companies. I worked for a tour company, APT, Australian Pacific Tours, in Australia when I was there for a brief period of time, working part-time, driving buses from Melbourne down to Port Phillip Island to see the fairy penguins. Did that for a little bit. And for hire buses that do special trips where they just take people on day trips down to the casinos and those types of things. So there's heaps of work as bus drivers. The other one the first one on there rather is transit bus drivers, and Corey actually is in the process of applying for a transit bus driver and is, made it to the second stage. So congratulations to Corey on that. So there's lots and lots and lots of work as bus drivers. So that's the other thing that I really like about the industry, is that there is lots of opportunity for you to move around within the industry. If you don't like what you're doing at one company, if you don't like pulling vans, that's basically just a box on a trailer. If you don't like pulling vans, you can go and pull flat deck. You can pull temperature controlled trailers, which is called a reefer in the unit. You can do specialty work. I mean, here in Vernon, BC, chip trucks and wood chips, for example, what they make press board out of, and logging trucks. There's tons of vocational work that you can do in the industry. And if you don't want to do that as a truck driver, then you can go and work as a bus driver. And that's what I did when I moved to Australia. And the reason I did that is that I was working here in North America. I was making 32 cents a mile in the late 1990s, running into the States. Well, the interstate, this United States has freeways. They have a huge interstate system. There are days you can run 8 hours on cruise and never come off cruise in the United States. You're going to make good money at 32 cents a mile. In Australia, it's not like that. They don't have interstates, and they don't have very good freeways either. They're 2-lane skinnies, as they're called. One lane of traffic going one way and the other one going the other way. Not to mention the roads are smaller. So 32 cents a kilometer initially to me seemed like a lot of money when I first looked at it going to Australia. Then I started looking at the maps, and it's up and down and around and through these little towns. Not to mention their hours of service regulations are less than what they are in North America. They can't run as much. So you weren't going to make as much money running in Australia by the mile. So that's why I decided to go and drive coaches for Greyhound. And it was a really good experience for me, and I made good money. In Australia, I think in the early 2000s, I was making $26 an hour working as a coach captain. So it worked out really well. Okay. Epic. Speaking of dump truck with a trailer, if you're in the United States, it's classified as a Class A license here. In my area, there's usually seen with paving companies that do driveways or roadway work. Yes. So usually Epic class tractor trailer licenses are Class A, Class 1. So it's either Class 1 or Class A is usually what it is in terms of the license hierarchy in terms of getting your license. Martin, you're right about not being on vacation when you're out here. I'm currently in Laredo, Texas, and believe me, it's not a vacation. I went to Laredo once on a run. They sent me down from Houston to Laredo, and this was quite a while ago, Martin. And I looked at the interstate and I thought, well, it's shorter to go this way down through the back way. No, it wasn't shorter. I should have gone down the interstate. And the other thing is that we had one of those flash floods there on the way to Laredo. I'm sure there was this much. I'm sure there was 6 inches of water flowing down the roadway because, I mean, it was, I'd been dry for so long, and in the desert, people don't know that you get flash floods because the soil is so dry that the earth won't absorb the water and it just runs off, and you get these flash floods. And I remember going through this town, and my girlfriend was with me at the time, and we were driving through this water, and of course, in a big truck, you just keep on plowing through it. And she was looking out the window, and I'm like focusing on what I'm doing because the windshield wipers are on high, and I'm like focusing on the road and trying to figure out how to get to Laredo on time because we had to be there by 3 o'clock on a Friday or they weren't going to load us, and we didn't make it anyway. But she looks at me and she starts laughing, and she says, "I think you just drowned that poor woman." There was some woman with an umbrella walking down the sidewalk and the spray off the truck. She said, "I think you just drowned that person." So that's what happened here. All right, so finish up on the presentation here. So for truck drivers, different kinds of work that you have to do: local P&D work, which is pick up and drop; vocational work, as I mentioned already, logging trucks, working in the oil patch, driving chip trucks and those types of things; doing regional work. A lot of tanker work tends to be regional, where you're gone for a day or two and then back. And then, of course, there's long haul work, and there tends to be a lot more money in long haul. The gentleman that I was talking at the truck driving school there in the province of Ontario the other day was saying to me that new drivers into the industry, fresh out of truck driving school, in Ontario, Canada here are now making somewhere between 40 and 50 cents a mile, which is pretty decent money to start. If you're running, so figure that out on 2,000 miles a week, 10,000 miles a month approximately, you're going to make $50,000 a year just in your first year, and you're going to be employed. That's the thing about it. And people who have experience are going to make more money than that running long haul, running LTL and those types of things. So there's, fairly decent money in the industry. I did make the mistake last week of saying that some people were going to make $100,000 in the industry. You can make $100,000 in the industry, but I would really say that $100,000 is really at the top of, your earning potential, unless you go on to start becoming an owner operator and buying 1 or 2, 3 trucks and those types of things and becoming a business person. You have to realize, and Shamil will say more about this, working as an owner operator, you are going to make more money, but there is heaps and heaps and heaps of more responsibility. One of the driving instructors that I worked with on Vancouver Island, for example, he had been an owner operator for most of his life, and when you come home, if you're the owner operator and you're the one driving the truck and you don't have any relief, you don't have another driver that's working with you to have some relief and those types of things. When you come home on the weekend, you're the one washing the truck, you're the one fixing the truck, changing the oil, doing all of the maintenance that needs to be done on that unit. Because if you're sending it out to a shop, it's a lot of money. I'm not sure what shops are charging there in the United States, but here in Canada, I know that they're probably well over $100 an hour for you to take your truck into the shop and get work done on it. And I've heard some interesting stories about guys that take their trucks in to get them greased. It's like, buy a grease gun and grease it yourself. You only need to grease it once a week, depending on the kind of work you're doing. If you're doing logging or some other, extreme kind of working in a gravel pit or those types of things, you might want to grease it every 2 or 3 days. But for the most part, most trucks only need to be greased once a week. And if you're an owner operator, you don't want to pay a shop $100 plus an hour to do something that you could do in 20 minutes yourself, climbing underneath the truck. So those are some other considerations in terms of being an owner operator. And there's a lot of business activities that you would have to do, keeping track of expenses, hiring a bookkeeper, those types of things. So it's a big deal when you become an owner operator. And I do encourage you, if you're thinking seriously about going to truck driving school, get some experience as a driver first before you think about going on and buying a truck. And there are a lot of bigger companies in North America that do offer own to lease to own programs where you can drive the truck. You make payments on the truck, they will finance it and those types of things. It tends to cost you a little bit more money in the long run, but it is one way that you can get into the industry as an owner-operator. All right, Ryan, can you make good money in bus driving here in North America? You can make decent money, Ryan. It depends on what you're doing. I know that a lot of the school bus drivers are all, they're union, and they do make decent money. I'm not sure exactly what the pay is. You'd have to call around to some of the school bus driving schools, and see what school bus companies rather, and see what their wage is and what the requirements are and those types of things. But driving a school bus is kind of tough because you don't work for 2 or 3 months in the summer. You're only working in the morning for a couple of hours, and then you work in the afternoon for a couple hours, so it may not work out for you. Working for Greyhound, unfortunately, Greyhound has scaled back its operations here in Canada. They're still fairly extensive in the United States. You could think about that. There are private bus companies that are driving, but unfortunately, long-haul bus driving isn't what it used to be because of cheap airfares. That's really cut into the bus industry here in North America. So it is something that you could potentially look into, but you would have to look around and see who is hiring bus drivers to do that kind of work and whatnot. So there is some work there for you to do as well. So that's essentially what it is. So I do encourage you, if you're thinking about being a bus or truck driver, as Martin and I said, and Shamil agreed as well, you're not on vacation when you're driving around. So if you are driving and you like driving and you think that driving a truck or driving a bus is something that you would like to do because it's recreational and and you're going to go and get to see places and whatnot. That's an option. That's a possibility. When I was in Australia, when I drove buses for Greyhound, yes, I did get to go to Canberra. I did get to go to Melbourne and Sydney and a place in the outback called Parks, New South Wales. But I never really saw those places, because you're not a tourist. You've been driving all day for 10 hours and then you get 8 or 9 hours off. You have to get some sleep. You have to get up in the morning and then you get back on a bus and you drive back the other way. So, as I said, you are delivering freight, services, and people between point A and point B. And if you're working in the oil fields or you're driving a vacuum truck in the oil fields, you're going to drive in, you're going to deliver the service, run the vac truck for 10 or 11 hours, and then you're going to drive back to wherever. So this is the kind of work that you're going to be looking at. So if you're considering this and you're doing your research about going to truck driving school, first of all, it hasn't come in the United States yet, the mandatory entry-level training program. It hasn't come to BC yet. It's definitely on the table. They're definitely working on it. It's just a matter of time before it comes here. It is in Ontario and it is in the prairie provinces. So mandatory entry-level training. So now, unfortunately, in these provinces and states that have mandatory entry-level training, the cost of tuition is going to be somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000. Also, while you're going to truck driving school, you have to live for that period of time. So ask the truck driving school, if I start next week, when can I get a road test? And because the road test date is the bottleneck in your truck driver training and getting you a license. And just on that note of test for Class 1, Class A tractor trailer license, it's 2.5 hours in length, and it consists of the 5 components of truck driving school. So turning, so driving the truck through town, shifting. You got to be able to shift the non-synchronous transmission, and I do encourage you to get that. You don't want the automatic transmission restriction on your license. Pre-trip inspection, hook and unhook, and then backing up. And each school is going to be a little bit different in terms of what the requirements are for backing up. When I was in Ontario, they had to back around the right-hand corner on the driver's side. When I went to Vancouver Island and in Victoria, they had to do a parallel park. I know that there are some CDL schools in the States and some testing centers, DOT testing centers in the United States, that make you parallel park on the blind side, which just boggles my mind about how difficult that is. But driving schools have figured it out. It's not great, and I definitely don't agree with it. And then there's other places like here in Vernon, British Columbia, where they have to back up straight for 50 feet, and which does not prepare somebody for driving a tractor trailer unit in the real world at all. And I commend Shamil on her driving school there in Texas for teaching students how to back into a loading dock, because that can be a real shock the first couple of times that you have to back into a loading dock, and you have to nail that perfectly when you get that truck and trailer in there. And of course, there's all kinds of truck driving fails here on YouTube that you can watch about how bad people are. Some people are. But one of the things that I'm striving to do here on the Smart Drive Test channel is to empower people so that they can get a job as a truck or bus driver. They can move into the industry and do the work that I know is out there, that they can get a job, have the job they want, have that sort of work-home life balance, right? Where you're home a certain amount of time and you're working a certain amount of time, you're getting paid a decent wage and those types of things. Because I know, it can be pretty tough if you're working over the road and you're gone for a week at a time. That can be challenging. Regional work, local city work, that type of thing. It pays a lot less, but you're home every night. And for example, there's a company here in Vernon that hauls chips. A lot of people want to work for them because it tends to be more kind of day work, but the thing is that they can be really long days, because you have to realize that when you're in the trucking industry, you're not governed by the usual rules, the usual employment rules that say that you can only work a certain amount of hours in the day, and then you have to be paid overtime. It doesn't work like that in the trucking industry. The truck drivers are excluded from those regulations, and I was trying to explain that to a friend of mine some years ago, and they just, they'd been in nursing, and they got penalties for working night shifts and those types of things, and they got time and a half on statutory holidays and whatnot. Trying to explain to this person that as a truck driver you didn't get any of that. So it's going to really depend on which company you go to work for, what they expect from you, your qualifications and whatnot. But compared to some of the other work that you're going to be doing, if you're working as a general laborer in construction, you're working at the warehouse at Walmart or whatnot, this could seem like a really big step up for you, and it really could be. I worked with Cliff a few years ago, and he went and got his bus license. He wanted to get a job as a transit driver, and he did get a job as a transit driver afterwards, but he'd been working nights at Walmart, as a shipper receiver for years and years and years, making terrible money. Not terrible money, but not making great money. But the thing is he had steady employment, and he wanted to go on and be a transit bus driver, and he did get his bus license, and he went on and did what he wanted to do, and it was a huge step up from him in terms of salary and working conditions compared to what he had been making working at Walmart as a shipper, as a receiver there. So it can be a really good career for you. And as well, like I said, there's lots of room to move around in the industry, and you're always going to be employed. Epic, speaking of a driving motor coach or transit bus, will the CDL school you attend in order to obtain passenger endorsement for bus drivers, are they also covered by logbooks just like truck drivers? Yes, Epic, excellent question. Yes, bus drivers too who travel beyond, for you there in the States, beyond 100 miles of your home terminal, yes, you have to keep a logbook. And when I was in Australia, yes, I had to keep a logbook when I was driving buses, and that's just part and parcel of it. So logbooks, hours of service regulations apply to any commercial driver, whether it's a bus or truck driver, who's traveling beyond 100 miles of their home terminal. So wherever you park the bus, so you park the bus in Newark, New Jersey, any place that you go that is 100 miles beyond Newark, New Jersey, you have to keep a logbook as a bus or truck driver. So the hours of service regulations apply to both bus and truck drivers. And again, if you can get your passenger endorsement when going to truck driving school, that's going to make you more employable. You can move into the bus industry as well and get experience there, especially if you have a background in customer service. You've been working at Walmart, you've been working at McDonald's as a counter person, then those are transferable skills that will let you move into the bus industry. And I can tell you, in terms of what Corey's doing, in terms of applying for a transit company, they're not looking for your ability to drive the bus. That is a very minor consideration now in terms of transit companies, because all of these transit companies are, not all of them, most of them are all unionized. And unfortunately, once the driver gets past his or her probation period, they're in the union, and it is really difficult to get rid of them. It's really difficult to fire them. And I mean, years ago, I was teaching how to work with people with disabilities when they brought in the low floor buses for people in wheelchairs and people who had mobility challenges and had sight impairment and those types of things. And I was talking one day about working with people who had sight impairment, people who were blind, using public transit to get around and those types of things, and talking about how sound overwhelms blind people. So if you're standing on a busy corner, it's really difficult for them to navigate traffic and getting across the road safely and those types of things. And this is now why we're seeing traffic lights that have chimes on them when you push the traffic light and it changes to green. This is for people with vision impairment. And I said to him, well, if you're a bus driver, you're a transit bus driver, you can just get out and help them and get them across the road. And one of the bus drivers says, no, I'm not doing that. And there was nothing that management could do about it. There was nothing I could do about it, because he was in the union, and if he didn't want to get off the bus and go out and help these people, he wasn't going to do it, and he didn't have to do it. So unfortunately, it's kind of one of those things where unions are good on one sense, that they provide better working conditions for drivers, but on the other hand, there's a little bit too much going on there in terms of how much rights that drivers have and what they can say that they don't have to do. So it works both ways. Ryan, does driving 5-ton truck is good experience? Yes, Ryan, it will definitely give you the experience that you need if you want to work as a truck driver. It's going to get you the experience. It's going to shoehorn you into the industry. So any experience you can get to become a truck driver and then kind of use that as a stepping stone to get the job that you actually want. That's what I did. Right when I first started in the industry, it was the same thing. I went to work driving team between Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and Vancouver, British Columbia, and it's about a 48-hour run. And I only did that for about 3 months because if you ever drive team in a big truck, you realize that the cab of a truck it's simply not big enough for two men's ego. And that only lasted for about 3 months. I was working for a broker. He had 3 or 4 trucks. He had some tax problems and those types of things, and that's what happened. And then I went to work for another company, for another 6 months. But then I realized, I was getting paid by the mile. I was supposed to be running over the road, but essentially what I ended up doing for this company was pulling freight out of Toronto down to Detroit, which is about a 3-hour run, drop the trailer in Detroit, go back to Toronto and get another load. And the American drivers were coming up to Detroit, picking the load up, and they were taking it to Texas and Florida and South Carolina and wherever. And so I wasn't making really any money. I was doing all the work, but I wasn't making any money. So that only lasted about 6 months, and then I went on to a company that eventually, I was making really good money and getting steady employment. So it took me about a year of working in the industry before I finally really got the job that I wanted. Martin, over this hours of service also change for U.S. drivers if we drive in Canada and for Canadians that drive here. Yes, and that is an excellent point, Martin. If you are a Canadian driver running into the U.S., unless you are very clever and completely understand hours of service regulations in the United States and you understand hours of service regulations in Canada, do not run on Canadian rules in the States. In Canada, you're allowed to drive for a total of 13 hours in the day. In the US, you're only allowed to drive 10 hours. So for those new drivers or drivers that are Canadian drivers who are moving into the States, drive on US rules and stay on US rules all the time because it's less and you're not going to get into trouble when you go into the States, because if you're running on Canadian rules and then you drive into the States, you're going to be over hours and you're going to be put out of service. So that's an excellent point that Martin just said. And if you want to go over to the Smart Drive Test website, I have logbook courses over there that you can have a look at. And I need to get caught up on the ELD courses, but they're more or less exactly the same. It's just, certain regulations that you have to keep certain paperwork with you in terms of your electronic logbooks. But know that, and that's a good point that Martin brought up, hours of service regulations are less in the States. So if you're a Canadian driver driving into the States, just stay on American rules, and that way you're not going to get into trouble. And as well, for American drivers coming into Canada, don't switch to the Canadian rules. Just stay on your American rules and then drive back into the States, and you're not going to get into trouble when you get back into the States. So don't switch back and forth. If you're driving in the States at all, just stay on American rules, and that way you're going to be okay when you get down there. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up there. Ryan, does most trucking companies still use paper logbooks or mostly electronic logbook? So a lot of companies in Canada are still using paper logbooks, Ryan. Some of them are beginning to switch over to ELDs, electronic logging devices. In the States, it became regulation as of last year that all companies had to use electronic logging devices. So if you're running into the States, you have to use an ELD. And there are there aren't lots, but there are a number of apps on your phone now that will do your hours of service calculations for you, as you simply download the app and then you can have it on your phone, and that is perfectly acceptable so long as you're sending the information into your company. And as well, for logbooks, we're kind of getting off topic here of the whole live stream, but for whatever cycle you're working on, so in Canada it's I'm going to get this wrong because it's been so long since I've talked about logbooks, but 70 hours and 7 days here in Canada. So you have to keep logbooks for the last week in your vehicle. You have to have those sheets available. And in the United States, it's 60 hours and 7 days, and you have to keep those previous log sheets in the vehicle with you when you get pulled into the scale house. And if they do an inspection, they usually want to see your paperwork and those types of things. And as well, there's a checklist for going into the scales over at the Smart Drive Test website. Maybe Corey, you can get that up for us. And then it'll give you a list of paperwork that you need to take into the scale house if you get pulled into the scale house, because most of the time they just won't come out and do an inspection on your truck. Most of the time they just want to see the paperwork. So when you get flagged to come in, so you're going to go across the scale, there's a set of lights up there. It'll tell you to proceed, stop, wait, and then go around back. And if you get pulled around back, they want to see you inside first. So when you come inside, you bring your driver's license in, the truck registration, the insurance for the truck, bills of lading, so whatever freight is on the back, logbook sheets will come in with you as well. If you're pulling TDG, transportation of dangerous goods, they want to see all of the transportation of dangerous goods documents when you come inside. I think that's everything that in terms of paperwork. But the first thing they're going to do is they're going to look at your log sheets, and they're going to look at your log sheets to make sure that you're within your work cycle, whether it's 70 hours and 7 days for those of us here in Canada, or 60 hours and 7 days for those of you in the States. So know that they're going to be looking at that paperwork, and they want to know that you're within compliance for hours of service regulations, that you have the right license to drive the truck is properly registered and insured, that you have all the bills of lading, that there isn't any dangerous goods on your vehicle, that the vehicle is placarded correctly. And if all of that is, passes inspection, usually they're not going to do an inspection on your vehicle. Unless something is, they saw something that was wrong when you went across the scale. For example, say you're hauling a flat deck and you got a load of paving stone on, and there's a couple of paving stones hanging off the side of the pallet that could potentially fall off the back of the truck. Then they're going to pull you around and they're going to do an inspection on your vehicle. Or your vehicle is overweight. If your vehicle is over dimensions, it's overweight or oversized, and they pull you into the scale, they want to see those permits, because you have to have those permits before you come across the scale. You have to have the oversized permits. You have to have the overweight permits. And they need to see that. And also, that's a whole other live stream and a whole other question and answer period in terms of pulling over dimensions or overweight freight. So make sure that you're in compliance with weights and axle weights as well, because that's the first thing that's going to flag you for an inspection when you get pulled into the scale house. So great live stream, lots of great questions here about going to truck driving school and the type of license that you should have and reasons why. And as I said, you're always going to be employed. It's going to be a challenge for you to get into the industry, but you can do that. You just need to do a bit of work, be persistent, and you'll get the job that you want, and you'll be employed for a good period of time and do the work that you want to do, as opposed to, working seasonal or those types of things and not having very good paying jobs. So it can work out for you. Get a plan, work the plan, and be successful, because I've seen lots of students over the years who have been successful getting their truck driver's license and starting a new career. So there's the scale house checklist. Corey got that up for us, and I do appreciate that. Thanks very much, Corey. So if you passed a road test in the last couple of weeks, congratulations on passing your road test. And if you're watching on the live stream, be sure to hit that thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel, and as well, leave us a comment down in the comment section there. Ask any questions you want, and we'll help you out in getting going as a CDL driver and starting your career as a truck or bus driver. And if you have a road test coming up in the next couple of weeks, good luck on that. And remember, pick the best answer, not necessarily the right answer. Have a great day. Bye now.